A poor teenage girl comes across an old homeless woman searching through a trash can for food, frail and confused with fading memories. And instead of walking away, she chooses to share her meal and bring her home, where her mother, though hesitant, welcomes the stranger with kindness, offering her warmth and shelter. And in return, the woman helps with small chores, showing surprising grace and knowledge of things far beyond her circumstances, until the girl discovers a locket that reveals the truth. This was not just a helpless old woman, but a missing millionaire whose return would transform their lives forever. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. The evening air carried the faint smell of fried food and fresh bread as Emily walked down the quiet street, clutching a small paper bag of leftovers from the diner where she sometimes helped clean tables. Her shoes scuffed the pavement, her body tired, but her mind heavier still with the endless worries of bills and rent that weighed on her family. She pulled the bag close to her chest, as if protecting something precious, because in truth, it was. This food meant tomorrow's dinner, a little relief for her mother, and maybe even a rare moment where they wouldn't go to bed hungry. But as she turned the corner, her steps slowed. In the dim light of a flickering street lamp, she noticed an old woman hunched over a trash can, her frail hands digging desperately among scraps that others had thrown away without a second thought. The sight was raw, unsettling, and for a moment Emily froze, torn between instinct and compassion. She thought of her own hunger, her mother's exhaustion, the countless nights they had stretched a single loaf of bread to last 3 days. Could she really afford to give anything away? Yet something about the woman's trembling hands and hollow eyes made it impossible to walk past. She felt the sting of hesitation, then a surge of defiance against it, as if her heart refused to let her choose selfishness over kindness. Slowly, she pulled out the small container, her fingers tightening before finally letting it go. "Here," she whispered, her voice carrying more resolve than she expected. The old woman looked up, startled, as though the very idea of someone offering her food was foreign. She reached out with quivering fingers, her expression one of disbelief rather than hunger. In that fragile exchange, Emily sensed that this was more than just a meal being shared. It was a moment that would ripple far beyond her imagination. What she didn't know and couldn't have known was that the woman standing before her wasn't just another forgotten soul on the street. She was someone who would soon turn her entire life upside down, in ways she never could have dreamed. Emily's life had never been simple, and every day reminded her of the weight her small shoulders carried. She lived with her mother in a cramped apartment where the wallpaper peeled and the pipes groaned whenever the heat kicked in. The rent notices stacked on the kitchen table felt like silent threats, each one whispering how close they were to losing even this fragile shelter. Her mother worked long hours cleaning offices, coming home with tired eyes and calloused hands. Yet the paychecks always seemed to vanish before the month was done. Emily tried to help however she could, scrubbing tables at the diner after school, carrying plates that felt heavier with the knowledge that each tip mattered. She rarely thought about herself because there was no room for selfish dreams when survival left little space for anything else. In her world, caution was a habit and sacrifice a necessity. She had learned to keep her head down, to avoid risks that might make things harder. And yet, standing in that moment with food in her hands and hunger in her own stomach, she made a choice that defied the logic of her life. Why risk helping another when you could barely help yourself? Perhaps because deep down, she understood that compassion often demands courage. Emily hesitated as the old woman lifted her head, her eyes pale and clouded, as if she were looking through the girl rather than at her. Her hands trembled violently as she reached for the bag, so thin and frail that Emily wondered how they could still move at all. Her coat hung in tatters, sleeves ripped, dirt ground into every seam, and her shoes were little more than cracked leather, barely clinging to her feet. When she finally took the food, she held it as though it might disappear, her lips parting in disbelief. "For me," she whispered, her voice hoarse, each word dragging as if unused for far too long. Emily nodded, though the sound of her own stomach twisting in hunger made her throat ache. The woman opened the bag slowly, her eyes wet as she looked at the simple meal inside, and as she tried to speak again, her words broke apart. I can't remember. There was a house, I think. Or maybe..." Her voice trailed into confusion. Her forehead creased as she pressed her fingers against a faint scar half hidden beneath her tangled hair. Emily's chest tightened. This wasn't just hunger. There was something lost inside this woman, a piece of her that couldn't find its way back. Compassion won where reason failed, and before she could stop herself, Emily spoke firmly. "You can't stay out here tonight. Come home with me. We don't have much, but it's warm." When Emily pushed open the apartment door with the old woman close behind, her mother's eyes narrowed immediately. Sarah was still in her work clothes, sleeves rolled up, weariness etched into her face. She looked at the stranger standing timidly in the doorway, then back at her daughter, and Emily felt the air grow heavy. "Emily," her mother said slowly, "who is this?" Emily's voice faltered, but she managed to explain that the woman had nowhere else to go. For a long moment, Sarah just studied her, lips pressed into a line that carried both fear and practicality. Yet when the old woman lowered her gaze, whispering a quiet, "I won't be a burden," something in Sarah softened. With a sigh, she set an extra bowl on the table. "One night," she said, "just one." As the hours passed, small details began to unsettle Emily. Though frail, the woman insisted on washing the dishes after dinner, carefully handling each plate as though it were fragile porcelain. When Sarah turned on the radio, she hummed softly to a piece of classical music, naming the composer with ease, before catching herself and falling silent. Later, she touched the rim of their chipped teacups and murmured, "We used to drink from fine china," her voice distant, as though she had spoken without meaning to. Emily and her mother exchanged glances, curiosity flickering between them. This woman carried herself with a grace that poverty could not erase, and though her body trembled, her manners and words hinted at a life far different from the one she seemed to live now. The following morning, as Emily gathered her books for school, she noticed the old woman sitting quietly on the edge of the couch, her frail hands folded neatly in her lap. Something metallic caught the light, a glimmer half hidden beneath the worn folds of her coat. Curious, Emily leaned closer and saw a delicate gold locket, its surface scratched but still gleaming faintly. When the woman noticed Emily's eyes on it, she instinctively pressed it to her chest as if guarding something sacred. "It's all I have left," she murmured, her voice soft but steady. With trembling fingers, she opened it to reveal two faded photographs, a younger version of herself, poised and elegant, and beside her a boy with striking features. Emily's breath caught because the face seemed familiar, someone she had glimpsed in newspapers left behind at the diner. Later that day, unable to quiet her curiosity, Emily flipped through an old stack of papers near the counter and froze. There, printed beneath bold letters that read, "Missing Heiress," was the very same face now sleeping on her couch. A wealthy widow, gone without a trace months ago. Emily's pulse raced. Should she say something? Should she tell her mother? A part of her feared that once the truth was out, the woman would be taken away, and this fragile bond would vanish. That night, as the radio played faintly in the background, the woman startled them both by whispering fragments of memory. The White House with the tall gates, the grand piano in the hall, my son William. Her eyes glazed as she tried to hold on to pieces of a past slipping through her fingers. Emily's chest tightened with a mix of awe and dread. This woman was not who she seemed, and the truth was pushing its way to the surface. Emily could no longer ignore the truth pressing in on all sides. The locket, the newspaper, the broken fragments of memory. It all pointed to a life far beyond the dim apartment walls. One evening, with her mother's hesitant agreement, she guided the woman onto the bus that wound through the city toward the wealthier neighborhoods. The ride was silent but charged, the woman clutching the locket in her hands, like a compass pointing her home. When they stepped off, her gaze locked on a towering iron gate at the end of the street, her breath catching as recognition flared in her weary eyes. Emily steadied her as they walked forward, each step heavier with anticipation. At the mansion door, trembling fingers pressed the bell, and moments later it swung open. A young man in his 30s froze in shock, his features mirroring the boy in the locket. His eyes filled instantly. "Mother," he whispered. The old woman staggered, tears spilling down her cheeks as she reached for him. In a heartbeat, he was holding her, cradling her as if afraid she might vanish again. Behind him, voices rose, family members rushing forward, gasps turning to sobs as recognition spread. The cold distance of months lost melted into a flood of relief, grief and love colliding all at once. Emily stood back, her own eyes stinging, as the woman who had seemed so broken in the shadows was restored to those who had never stopped searching. The reunion left the room overflowing with gratitude, and it wasn't long before every eye turned to Emily and her mother, who stood quietly near the doorway, unsure whether they still belonged in such a grand place. The son approached them, his voice steady but thick with emotion, thanking them over and over for giving his mother back. But it was the old woman herself who insisted her voice be heard. Holding Emily's hand, she said with gentle authority, "This girl saw me when no one else did. She gave what little she had, and because of her, I am home. I will not let her kindness go unanswered." She turned to Sarah, her eyes softening. "You've carried burdens alone for too long. From now on, you'll never have to again. A place in my household will be yours, steady work and security." Then she looked back at Emily. "And you, my dear, will have the education you deserve, every dream within reach." Emily's throat tightened, overwhelmed by the weight of generosity pouring back upon them. In that moment, the world felt balanced, as if every sacrifice had circled back with greater return, proving that kindness, even in scarcity, multiplies in ways no one can measure. The weeks that followed brought quiet transformation. Sarah walked home each evening without the heavy slump of exhaustion, her new job bringing stability and peace. Emily sat at her desk with books spread wide, studying without the fear of how tomorrow's bills would be paid. Their home was still humble, but it pulsed with hope instead of worry. And often, when they gathered around the table, they thought of the night that had changed everything. The night a simple act of compassion, became the doorway to a new life. Sometimes the smallest kindness can open doors you never knew existed. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more stories that remind us why kindness always matters.